Welcome to this deep dive psychological analysis. As a practicing therapist, observing cultural touchstones through a clinical and therapeutic lens allows us to unpack the profound layers of human emotion, trauma, resilience, and connection that art uniquely captures. Today, we are embarking on a massive, highly detailed journey exploring a monument of modern musical and visual history, reacting to and analyzing Michael Jackson's masterpiece, Remember the Time, for the very first time. In this first chapter, we will lay the psychological groundwork, examining the introductory phases of the short film, the complex emotional dynamics of the characters, the historical and cultural setting as a psychological canvas, and the immediate therapeutic impressions of Michael Jackson as both a performer and a psychological entity. When we look at art, especially art created by individuals who lived highly complex, heavily scrutinized lives, we must approach our analysis with a profound sense of empathy, clinical curiosity, and psychological nuance. Michael Jackson remains one of the most studied figures in modern cultural history, not just for his unparalleled musical genius, but for the intricate, often painful psychological architecture that defined his existence. To look at his work for the first time through a therapeutic framework means looking past the surface glamour, the stunning choreography, and the infectious rhythms, and instead looking directly into the emotional core of what is being communicated. Art is fundamentally an externalization of the internal world. It is the subconscious mind finding a language when ordinary words fail. In Remember the Time, we are treated to a visual and auditory narrative that operates on multiple psychological tiers simultaneously, dealing with themes of desire, boredom, authority, personal agency, and the transformative power of genuine, authentic expression. Let us begin by dissecting the opening sequences and the environmental framing of this short film, which takes place in an idealized, opulent vision of ancient Egypt. From a clinical perspective, the choice of setting is never arbitrary. Ancient Egypt represents a pinnacle of absolute power, divine right, and rigid societal hierarchies. In the opening scenes, we meet the pharaoh, portrayed with immense gravity by Eddie Murphy, and his queen, played with regal elegance by Amon. Immediately, a therapist notices the interpersonal dynamics and the underlying atmospheric tension of this court. The pharaoh and queen sit upon grand thrones, surrounded by absolute luxury, yet there is a palpable sense of emotional stagnation and profound boredom, particularly from the queen. From a psychological standpoint, this boredom is highly diagnostic. It speaks to the concept of hedonic adaptation, a psychological phenomenon where individuals who possess everything, who have achieved the absolute apex of material and social status, become desensitized to pleasure and novelty. The queen's expression is one of deep apathy. Her environment, despite its gold and grandeur, has become an emotional desert. The pharaoh, desperate to appease and entertain his partner, summons various performers to break this state of psychological torpor. This introduces a fascinating study in authority and the human reaction to failure under high-stakes pressure. The first entertainer steps forward, attempting to perform a display of fire-eating. The performance is rigid, tense, and ultimately fails to elicit any positive emotional response from the queen. In fact, her rejection is swift and absolute. The pharaoh, operating from a position of absolute, unchecked authority, orders the performer to be executed or dragged away. As a therapist watching this unfold, we must analyze the emotional climate of fear that governs this space. When an environment is ruled by fear, creativity and authentic human expression are paralyzed. The performers who come before the royal couple are not creating art out of joy or a desire to connect, they are performing out of survival. This creates an emotional dissonance that the queen, consciously or subconsciously, detects. She rejects the performance because it lacks soul, it lacks authenticity, and it is saturated with the anxious energy of compliance. This dynamic repeats with the second performer, a worker of illusions or magic, whose efforts are similarly met with cold disdain and a subsequent decree of punishment. This sequence establishes a critical psychological tension before Michael Jackson's character even enters the frame. It tells the viewer, and the analyzing therapist, that this is a world where showing up as anything less than extraordinary is dangerous. It is a world of conditional acceptance, where your worth as a human being is entirely tied to your ability to perform, to entertain, and to please those in power. For anyone familiar with the developmental psychology of child performers, or individuals who grew up in highly demanding, performance-driven households, this theme resonates on a deeply personal and painful level. It mirrors the actual lived experience of Michael Jackson himself, whose childhood was defined by a relentless, unyielding demand for perfection under the strict authority of a demanding parental figure. Thus, the narrative framework of the short film acts as a profound metaphor for the very psychological crucible that shaped the artist in real life. Then, the atmosphere shifts dramatically. A mysterious figure draped in a blue hooded robe enters the court. The sudden appearance of this figure disrupts the established order of the room. The guards are tense, the pharaoh is suspicious, and the queen's interest is faintly piqued by this sudden injection of mystery into her stagnant world. The hooded figure throws a handful of golden dust into the air, a visual representation of disrupting reality, breaking the trance of boredom, and signaling a transition into a different psychological state. When the dust clears, the robe falls away to reveal Michael Jackson. The immediate physical presentation of Michael in this moment is worthy of deep psychological examination. He stands before the court not with the trembling anxiety of the previous performers, but with an air of quiet confidence, a gentle smile, and an intense, magnetic presence that immediately shifts the locus of control in the room. As the music drops and the iconic groove of "Remember the Time" begins, we witness a profound therapeutic transformation of the environment. Michael's character does not begin by pleading for his life or showing deference to the tyrannical authority of the pharaoh. Instead, he addresses the queen directly, initiating a profound interpersonal connection that completely bypasses the rigid structures of the court. The song itself is an exploration of nostalgia, memory, and shared emotional history. When he asks, "Do you remember the time?" he is invoking the psychological power of memory to bridge a gap that has grown between two souls. In therapy, we often use the exploration of shared positive memories to help couples or individuals reconnect with their core emotional truths when they have become lost in the dry, sterile routines of daily life or the heavy burdens of resentment and emotional distance. Michael's character is acting as an emotional catalyst, using melody and movement to reawakening a dormant part of the queen's psyche. The choreography in these initial moments is nothing short of a masterclass in psychological projection and somatic communication. Somatic tracking and movement analysis tell us that how a person moves their body is a direct reflection of how they inhabit their internal space. Michael's movements are incredibly sharp, extraordinarily precise, yet fluid and effortless. There is no trace of the frantic, fear-based energy that doomed the previous performers. Instead, his movement displays complete self-actualization. He is entirely integrated with his body, using every snap of his fingers, every tilt of his fedora-like headpiece, and every slide of his feet to command the space around him. By asserting his own physical and artistic sovereignty in a space that demands absolute submission, he effectively neutralizes the climate of fear. He shows the court, and the audience, that true artistic power cannot be mandated by a pharaoh's decree, it can only be born from an internal wellspring of authentic passion and self-belief. Looking closely at the facial expressions and micro-expressions during this first musical segment provides rich therapeutic data. Michael's gaze is intensely focused on the queen, yet it carries a soft, playful, and deeply affectionate quality. It is a gaze that invites connection rather than demanding compliance. The queen's response is a beautiful study in psychological thawing. We see her defensive armor, which was firmly intact during the opening scenes, begin to crack. Her posture shifts from a slumped, detached position to one of forward engagement. Her eyes widen, and a subtle, genuine smile begins to form on her lips. This is a visual representation of emotional attunement, a concept we hold sacred in psychotherapy. Attunement occurs when one person deeply senses and mirrors the emotional state of another, creating a resonant loop of shared feeling. Michael's performance is so potently attuned to her unspoken need for vitality, romance, and recognition that she cannot help but be drawn out of her psychological isolation. However, this growing connection between Michael's character and the queen creates an immediate, volatile counterreaction from the pharaoh. Eddie Murphy's portrayal of the pharaoh shifts from lazy boredom to intense, narcissistic injury and jealousy. From a psychological perspective, the pharaoh's authority is rooted entirely in control and ownership. He owns the court, he owns the guards, and he believes he owns the emotional life of his queen. To see an outsider come into his space and effortlessly evoke a deep emotional response from his partner, something he himself was unable to do despite his absolute power and wealth, is a direct threat to his ego. The pharaoh's face darkens, his body tenses, and he leans forward, signaling his intent to crush this disruption. This introduces a classic archetypal conflict, the conflict between the rigid, controlling, punitive ego represented by the pharaoh, and the free-spirited, expressive, integrating shadow or anima represented by Michael. The interplay between Michael and his background dancers during this first half of the script also demands clinical attention. The dancers are perfectly synchronized with him, moving as a single, cohesive organism. This level of group synchronization has deep evolutionary and psychological roots. When human beings move together in perfect rhythm, it releases a cascade of neurochemicals, including oxytocin and endorphins, which foster deep feelings of social bonding, trust, and collective strength. In the context of the short film, this synchronized collective acts as a powerful counterweight to the pharaoh's army of guards. The guards represent external, enforced order through weapons and physical intimidation. Michael and his dancers represent internal, organic order through shared purpose, rhythm, and artistic harmony. It is a battle between the power of force and the power of attraction, and visually, the power of attraction proves to be vastly more compelling. As a first-time viewer analyzing this clinically, one cannot help but reflect on the specific vocal performance and how it interacts with the visual narrative. Michael. Remember the Time are a fascinating blend of smooth, soulful vulnerability and percussive, urgent vocalizations. His signature hiccups, gasps, and rhythmic improvisations are not merely musical embellishments, they are raw, unfiltered expressions of emotional intensity. In therapy, we pay close attention to the paralinguistic features of a client's speech, the tone, the pacing, the size, the catches in the throat, because these elements often carry more emotional truth than the actual words spoken. Michael's vocal delivery is filled with a yearning quality, a passionate plea to validate an experience that occurred in the past. This insistence on remembering speaks to a universal human desire to preserve our most sacred emotional connections against the eroding effects of time, neglect, and societal pressure. The narrative progression within Chapter 1 reaches an emotional crescendo as Michael's character moves closer to the throne, directly challenging the physical and psychological boundaries established by the pharaoh. He is no longer just performing at a distance, he is stepping into the personal space of royalty, breaking the taboo of separation. This act requires immense psychological courage and an absolute lack of internalized inferiority. For a man who historically struggled with intense personal insecurities, social anxieties, and the overwhelming weight of global fame, seeing him embody a character of such unshakable, seductive confidence is deeply moving. It suggests that the stage, and the medium of the short film, was a therapeutic sanctuary for Michael, a space where he could transcend the limitations and pains of his fragile earthly existence and fully inhabit his divine, creative power. On that set, within that narrative, he was completely invincible, capable of captivating queens and defying kings with a single look. The psychological landscape of this first chapter leaves us hanging in a state of exquisite tension. We have watched a cold, authoritarian world be completely destabilized by the arrival of a transformative artistic force. We have seen a queen awaken from an emotional coma, a king pushed to the brink of a narcissistic rage, and a collective of dancers creating a revolutionary space of rhythm and joy. The therapeutic journey has only just begun, as the lines between memory and reality, control and freedom, are drawn in the shifting sands of this ancient Egyptian court. This sets the stage perfectly for the next phase of our analysis, where the conflict intensifies, the choreography becomes even more complex, and the deeper psychological undercurrents of the film's conclusion come to light. We now enter the second chapter of our deep dive therapeutic analysis, Moving past the initial shockwaves of Michael Jackson's arrival into the explosive climax, the intricate psychological warfare, and the ultimate resolution of Remember the Time. Having established the profound emotional awakening of the Queen and the subsequent narcissistic wounding of the Pharaoh, the narrative now shifts from a state of seductive introduction into an active, high-stakes confrontation between absolute physical authority and absolute creative freedom. As a therapist, analyzing this progression feels akin to watching a profound intrapsychic battle play out on a grand visual stage, where the various characters embody conflicting parts of the human psyche striving for dominance, recognition, and integration. The second half of the short film opens with an escalation of physical and psychological tension as the Pharaoh fully mobilizes his guards to eliminate the threat that Michael poses to his marital monopoly and his sovereign ego. The guards step forward with their spears, forming a literal and symbolic barrier of cold steel and rigid intimidation around the performance space. In psychological terms, this represents the defense mechanisms of a highly threatened ego structure. When a person is confronted with a truth or an emotional awakening that they cannot control, their immediate, primitive response is often to wall themselves off, to deploy aggressive defenses, and to attempt to destroy the source of the emotional disruption. The Pharaoh cannot tolerate a reality where his wealth and status are eclipsed by the raw, charismatic authenticity of a traveler, so he resorts to the only tool he understands: systemic force. What happens next is a brilliant display of somatic resilience and psychological subversion. Instead of scattering in fear or submitting to the advancing guards, Michael and his collective of dancers integrate the threat into their choreography. The movement becomes faster, sharper, and increasingly dynamic, weaving in and out of the spaces between the guards. This choice sends a powerful therapeutic message about how we handle adversity and external pressure. Michael does not meet force with force, he meets force with agility, rhythm, and creativity. By dancing around and through the oppressive structures of the court, he effectively renders them obsolete. He shows that the rigid armor of authority is no match for the fluid, adaptive intelligence of a fully self-actualized creative spirit. The spears and armor of the guards look clumsy, heavy, and useless against the effortless, airborne precision of the dancers. This segment features the legendary, extended dance breakdown that serves as the energetic heart of Remember the Time. From a movement therapy perspective, this choreography is an absolute marvel of group cohesion and individual expression. The dancers form complex geometric configurations, shifting patterns seamlessly, yet every single individual remains locked into the exact same foundational groove. This balances the psychological tension between the individual and the collective. In healthy psychological systems, a person can belong deeply to a community without losing their unique, individual identity. We see this beautifully illustrated here. While the background dancers are flawlessly synchronized, Michael still stands out, his individual flair and spontaneous micro-movements serving as the guiding light for the entire group. He is not a dictator commanding compliance like the Pharaoh, he is a conductor inspiring a shared, joyful state of flow. Let us look closely at the specific nature of the choreography in this climax, which heavily incorporates elements of hip-hop, traditional African dance, and Michael's own signature pop-locking style. The movements are deeply grounded, featuring low centers of gravity, powerful hip isolations, and sharp, percussive footwork that beats against the floor like a drum. This grounding is highly significant in clinical bodywork. When an individual is grounded, they are deeply connected to the earth, to their instincts, and to their primal power. This stands in stark contrast to the sterile, elevated, and detached posture of the Pharaoh on his throne. Michael is bringing the raw, unfiltered energy of life, passion, and sexuality directly onto the cold marble floors of the palace. It is an act of psychological liberation, reclaiming the body as a site of joy and emotional expression rather than a tool for labor, warfare, or rigid courtly etiquette. As the dance breakdown reaches its zenith, the camera cuts frequently to the Queen, whose psychological transformation is now complete. She is no longer a passive spectator in her own life, she has been completely swept up in the emotional currents of the performance. Her eyes are locked onto Michael with an expression of intense validation, longing, and recognition. She is remembering. In trauma-informed therapy, we often talk about the process of reclaiming lost or dissociated parts of the self. When a person undergoes prolonged emotional deprivation or lives under an oppressive, controlling environment, they often dissociate from their desires, their passion, and their vitality to survive. Michael's question, "Do you remember the time?" acts as a psychic key that unlocks those hidden chambers of her heart. She is not just remembering a past lover, she is remembering herself. She is remembering who she was before she became trapped in the gilded cage of the pharaoh's court. This profound emotional communion between the performer and the queen causes the pharaoh's anger to boil over into an absolute decree of destruction. He signals his elite guards to close in for the final strike, trapping Michael in the center of the room. The space contracts, and the threat of violence becomes immediate and absolute. It is here that the short film takes a fascinating, magical realist turn that holds immense psychological weight. Just as the guards are about to seize him, Michael spins with incredible, dizzying velocity. The spin acts as a psychological vortex, drawing in all the energy of the room and concentrating it into a single point of absolute intensity. When he stops, he does not merely stand there, he dissolves into a cloud of shimmering golden dust, scattering into the air and vanishing from the physical grip of the guards entirely. The psychological symbolism of this disappearance is breathtakingly profound. Michael's character cannot be captured, shackled, or executed by the structures of worldly power because he does not belong to the material world, he belongs to the realm of the spirit, of art, and of eternal memory. By transforming into golden dust, he transcends the physical limitations and dangers of the environment. He leaves the pharaoh holding nothing but empty air, a powerful metaphor for the ultimate impotence of tyranny when faced with the immortal nature of true creative genius. You can control a person's body, you can threaten their life, and you can demand their external compliance, but you can never capture their soul, their imagination, or the love they have planted in the hearts of others. As the golden dust settles and the music fades into a haunting, atmospheric echo, we see the lingering psychological aftermath of this encounter on the remaining characters. The palace is quiet, but it is fundamentally changed. The pharaoh looks around with a mixture of confusion, frustration, and a subtle undercurrent of existential dread. He has realized that there are forces in this universe, forces of love, memory, and artistic brilliance, that his absolute power cannot touch, purchase, or destroy. His authority has been exposed as an illusion, a fragile construct that can be completely dismantled by a song and a dance. He is left sitting on his grand throne, but he is more isolated and powerless than ever before. The final frame focuses on the queen, and it is here that the true therapeutic resolution of the short film lies. Though Michael has physically vanished from the room, the emotional landscape of her face is entirely different from the dead, vegetative apathy we witnessed at the beginning of the story. Her eyes are bright, her posture is alive, and a soft, knowing smile remains etched upon her lips as she looks at the golden dust settling on the floor. She has been permanently altered by the encounter. The therapeutic intervention was successful. Michael's character did not need to stay, overthrow the kingdom, or run away with the queen to achieve his purpose. His goal was to reawaken her soul, to remind her of her inherent worth, and to plant a seed of emotional freedom that the pharaoh can never take away from her. She now carries that memory within her, an internal sanctuary of joy that will sustain her through whatever lies ahead. Reflecting on this entire masterpiece for the first time as a clinician, one is left with a sense of profound awe for Michael Jackson's intuitive understanding of human psychology, archetypal storytelling, and the healing power of art. Remember the Time is not just a music video, it is a profound allegorical exploration of the human journey out of emotional stagnation and oppression into a state of vibrant, integrated liberation. Through his unmatched somatic brilliance, vocal vulnerability, and narrative vision, Michael created a timeless piece of therapeutic art that continues to resonate across cultures and generations, reminding us all of the sacred duty to remember, honor, and protect the authentic fires of our own hearts.